Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name's Angela, and this is episode 11. Okay, welcome back, everybody. No real updates to talk about before we get into the show. I just want to share one thing that happened that was really awesome. Alex Ross is a comic book artist, and he is famous for painting comics. All of his illustrations are painted with watercolors, and his style is very realistic. He will, pose models in costumes and paint based on that sometimes. I've been a fan of his since my mid-teens. So I was on Twitter and saw that he'd posted a kind of a vertical image of Wonder Woman with her bracelets crossed. And I retweeted that and added the comment, "Hello, new phone wallpaper." And a few minutes later, I got a notification that he had liked and retweeted my comment, which is just really amazing. This guy who I've been a fan of for years, and I had one fine arts class in college, and we had to give a report on an artist, and this is the guy I chose. And he's retweeting my comment, and it was just amazing. It got a record number of likes and retweets for me, which was great. And according to the Twitter statistics thing, was seen almost 9,000 times. Yes, I know, not over 9,000. I was kind of looking forward to making that joke, but no, I can't. So yeah, it's not really news or an important update, but it was really cool, man. And I can guarantee you that is going to be my phone wallpaper for a very long time. Okay, we're starting out in the pre-crisis universe with Wonder Woman Volume 1, Issue 1. Now, this series started out quarterly instead of monthly, so this is the summer issue, but according to the DC Wiki, it came out in June 1942. Writer was, of course, Charles Moulton, who we know was really William Moulton Marsden. The art is by Harry G. Peter, and I'm reading it from Wonder Woman Archives Volume 1. Now, this book starts out with an introduction to Alice Marbles, who was the new associate editor of Wonder Woman. She was a tennis champion, and she writes about how comics have a huge influence, and how Wonder Woman is her favorite character. We also get a letter from Olympic swimmer Helen Wainwright Stelling, who, along with boxing heavyweight champs Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey, wrote in to tell the president of All American Comics how much she loves Wonder Woman. From my research, the boxers' letters were printed in Sensation Comics 1 and 2, but they aren't included in this collected edition. Next, we get a brief summary of Wonder Woman, along with the 4 Olympians whose powers she emulates: Aphrodite's beauty, Athena's wisdom, Hercules' strength, and Mercury's speed. Now, unlike Sensation Comics, this was actually a 64-page issue, so it contains 4 individual stories instead of the usual one. So, in the first one, Captain Steve Trevor crashes his plane into the sea and is quickly hidden from view by mist. Since there's no land within 1,000 miles of the crash site, Colonel Darnell lists him as killed in the line of duty. But then a few weeks later, he's brought, injured but alive, into a hospital by a mysterious woman in a colorful costume. The girl, whom Trevor calls his Wonder Woman, quickly disappears, but she happened to drop a scroll written in ancient Greek. This scroll is translated by an archaeologist, Dr. Hellas, and tells the history of the Amazons. According to the scroll, the Earth is governed by 2 gods, Ares and Aphrodite, who are constantly fighting for control. The men of Ares, also called Mars, constantly wage war, but Aphrodite sculpted a race of women from clay and made them stronger than the men. However, she commanded them to rule by love, and gave their queen Hippolyte her magic girdle, which makes them indefeatable in battle. With its power, the Amazons easily defend their city of Amazonia. Mars feels tricked, so he has Hercules invade with his army and challenge Hippolyte to a duel. The queen defeats the demigod, but he pretends to surrender, then at the victory feast uses his charms to get her to hand him her girdle. His men rise up and defeat the Amazons, leading them away in chains. The queen prays to Aphrodite, who answers by giving them the strength to break those chains, although they must forever wear their shackles so they will remember what happens when they allow themselves to be controlled. The Amazons overcome their captors, Hippolyte recovering the girdle, and then take off in the men's boats. Aphrodite leads them to Paradise Island, where they build a peaceful civilization. The narration tells us that this is where the parchment ends, but continues the story from other sources. Hippolyte learns from the goddess how to sculpt a child from clay, and Aphrodite gives it life, naming the child after the goddess of the hunt. We see Diana grow, showing the first signs of her famous strength and speed, as well as her pledging herself to Aphrodite and getting her bracelets at the age of 15, and drinking from the Amazon's birthright, water from the fountain of eternal youth, until the fateful day that she and Mala spot Steve Trevor clinging to a floating wing as he drifts past their island. The two rescue him, learning his identity from his paperwork. Forbidden to take a man to the city, Diana brings him to her lab where she works for 5 days to develop a ray tube with a healing purple frequency. Just as she finishes, the doctor enters to tell her that Steve has died, but the princess refuses to give up and manages to use the purple ray to revive him. The doctor reports on Diana to her mother, who insists the American must be taken back to man's world. Diana volunteers, but the queen, recognizing her daughter has fallen in love and not wanting her to lose her immortal birthright, refuses. Meanwhile, Mars taunts Aphrodite that the World War makes him ruler of Earth, so she decides to send one of her Amazons to America to help them end the fighting. She commands Hippolyte to send her strongest warrior, and so the now famous tournament is arranged. Diana enters, disguising her identity with a mask, and competes in kanga fencing, wrestling, and leaping over an opponent armed with a lasso. Finally, it's down to the masked contestant number 7 and contestant number 12, Mala, as they face the final challenge of bullets and bracelets. Mala is wounded, but the masked warrior is victorious and reveals her identity to the queen. She's given her costume, designed by Aphrodite herself, as well as the lasso made from the golden links of the magic girdle. After her victory, her mother explains the lasso's powers, and Diana tests it by commanding the doctor, who'd entered the throne room to report that Trevor had improved and no longer needed eye bandages, to stand on her head. After scolding her daughter, the queen commands Trevor's blindfold be replaced so he can't see the wonders of Paradise Island. And Diana volunteers and uses the opportunity to learn the man's story. He explains he was tracking a spy to an island, but when he got there, machine guns took out his plane and he was drifting for days before being rescued. All too soon, the day arrives when Steve must be taken back, so Diana bids her mother and sisters farewell and takes off in her invisible plane. On the way, she stops at the island Steve showed her on the map and is able to capture the spy he was tailing, who thanks to the magic lasso gives up the name of the chief Nazi agent in San Francisco. For getting this information, Steve is promoted by Darnell to Major. He insists Wonder Woman was really the one responsible, although he's unable to recognize her when he meets his new nurse, Diana Prince. So yeah, this story does a good job of fleshing out the story that we got in All-Star Comics 8, but it does also change some stuff. Like how Steve didn't crash on Paradise Island, he crashed in the ocean and drifted to Paradise Island, and Wonder Woman getting her lasso before she left instead of after. Generally in comics, when they retell a character's backstory, that new version will supersede the old one. Like, for instance, with Iron Man, Tony Stark was originally injured in the Vietnam War, and then it became the Gulf War, and now it's Iraq. It's just, every time they retell it, they just push it to the next most recent war. Because of the episodic nature of comics and the way that the world will change without much time actually passing, it's one of those things you kind of just have to go with. Just know that if and when there are any continuity issues, the new story supersedes what the old story said. Continuing with the Pilgrim's Progress style naming, Dr. Hellas is named after the Greek word for Greece. I really loved the detail that all of the Amazons were sculpted from clay by Aphrodite. It just really takes away that trope in the more modern stories that I'm not a fan of, where Diana feels like an outcast because she wasn't born naturally. The illustration for Hercules is just great. He looks like a giant shaved gorilla. His torso is massive and he's got this teeny little waist that, you know, would just not support that much weight. He really ought to be going around on all fours. This is the first issue where we get the word hola, and it's actually first spoken by one of Hercules' men. I'm not entirely sure of the pronunciation. I mean, hola obviously is Spanish for hello, but that really doesn't make much sense for a Greek-speaking civilization, since Spanish is a Romance language. I don't know that we ever actually get a translation, but it's basically kind of a cheer or a war cry. Maybe like the way huzzah is used at a Renaissance fair. And actually, if you remember the TV show Stargate SG-1, It kind of reminds me of the Jaffa word, Cree, that they would just call out and it would mean whatever they needed it to at the time. This is also the first time we're introduced to the purple healing ray. In this issue, it kind of takes the appearance of like a fluorescent tube. And actually, it reminded me of a black light, which makes sense. I mean, black lights emit ultraviolet light, and I know UV is used in some medical treatments, and it can kill bacteria and germs, so they'll use it a lot for sterilizing medical equipment. So as wacky as, purple healing ray sounds, it at least has a tiny bit of a basis in real science. This issue is the first time we see Ares introduced to the story. Fun fact, in the original myths, he and Aphrodite actually had an affair for quite a long time, and they had 5 kids together, 3 of which we've already met in the 80s comics with Phobos, Deimos, and Harmonia. And I should point out that even though Edda, who will be appearing later in this issue, has been a lot less of just a punchline for fat jokes since her first appearance, the fat jokes are not entirely gone. There's a rather bulky Amazon competing in the competition, and her name is literally Fatsis. And when they're wrestling, Mala refers to her as a 2-ton grease heap that's going to suffocate her, which, just really unnecessary. I mean, come on. Fatsis, as if the overweight X-Wing pilot in Star Wars called Porkins wasn't bad enough. Although, come to think of it, with Wonder Woman villains like Luigi del Slimo and Star Wars villains like Darth Sidious, who knows, maybe George Lucas got some inspiration from some old Wonder Woman comics. It's possible. Highly unlikely, but possible. Moving on. The next story in this issue is called Wonder Woman Goes to the Circus. Secretary Prince and Major Trevor see a poster for a special showing of King's Colossal Circus to benefit the Army Welfare Fund, so Diana convinces Steve to help her and Etta take a group of kids. As the children take in the animals, Diana strikes up a conversation with the owner's niece Elva and the chief elephant wrangler, San Yan, who talk about how the elephants are worshipped in their native Burma, where the people believe they are the reincarnation of their ancestors. Just then, one of the elephants falls over dead, seemingly poisoned, and Elva cries to her boyfriend, trapeze artist Daring Dom Carney, that it's the 7th such case just this week, and if it keeps up, her uncle will be forced to close. Dom isn't too sympathetic, since Uncle Ed threatened to fire him when he asked for Elva's hand, and comments that if they all die, she will be out of a job and they'll be free to get married. While this is going on, Steve finds some racketeers, led by a guy named Mike Muldoon, trying to beat up San Yan and the other Burmese elephant handlers when they refuse to buy protection, but thankfully the Major is able to chase them off. Later, during the show, Elva is dancing with one of the elephants when it falls down dead, pinning the girl beneath it. But Wonder Woman shows up and lifts it with ease. The crowd cheers, and the ringmaster asks the Amazon to keep them entertained while they care for Elva, which she agrees to, provided they take a special collection for the troops. She carries horses and wrestles lions, putting on a great show, although when she goes to do a huge trapeze leap, an unknown hand throws a stone, swinging the bar out of her reach and forcing her to flip in midair and catch it with her legs. Once the show ends, Wonder Woman and Steve meet with Ed King, the circus owner, who says he's got to stop the elephant killings. Steve suspects Muldoon's gang, but King thinks Daring Dom is behind it. Wonder Woman tells them about the trapeze and comes up with a plan. She gets a stuffed baby elephant from the circus's museum, and she and Etta wear it like a costume, hiding in the pen. That night the Burmese handlers enter, bowing to the elephants with San Yan serving as high priest. Having learned every language in Man's World, Wonder Woman tells Etta that the handlers are promising their gods that this is the night they will crush the foreigners. Forgetting herself, Etta cheers that they're going to trample the poisoners, which the priest thinks is the voice of their ancestors. However, one of the adult elephants gets suspicious and throws the fake baby into the air with its trunk, revealing Wonder Woman and Etta on impact. San Yan says that for profaning their ancestral spirits, the foreigners will be taken to the secret temple and sacrificed. Meanwhile, Steve is hiding under the tiger carriage, spying on Muldoon and his gang as they plan to eliminate the elephant handlers for not paying. Steve crawls forward to capture the racketeers, but the tiger above him acts like every cat does when a small furry thing suddenly appears beneath him, and bats at his head with a paw, knocking the Major unconscious. Muldoon and his men enter the elephant pen and capture the 2 handlers they find inside, but fail to see a third man hiding on an elephant's back. Steve awakens to find the gangsters driving off with their captives, so he takes off in pursuit. At the same time, Ed King interrupts Elva and Dom meeting up in the elephant tent. But just as he's about to fire the trapeze artist, one of the elephants, commanded by the last remaining handler whispering into its ear, picks up the girl in its trunk, breaks its chain, and runs off. King and Dom jump onto horses and follow in hot pursuit. We watch as San Yan and his men lead Wonder Woman and Etta to a secret cave and fetter them to elephant statues with the same chains used on their gods, and when the elephant carrying Elva arrives, she's chained up as well. The High Priest monologues for a bit, explaining that he and his men are the ones killing the elephants. In fact, they came all the way from Burma with the express intent of freeing their ancestral spirits who've been held captive by the foreigners. As he talks, Wonder Woman realizes he's speaking Burmese with a thick Japanese accent, so she breaks her chains just as a switch is thrown, and the statue she's manacled to pivots upward, leaving her flat on her back in front of an elephant's massive feet. She jumps up and grabs 1 foot in each hand, holding the creature at bay. She confronts San Yan, outing him as a Japanese spy whose true purpose for killing elephants is to keep the circus from raising funds for the troops. He promises to confess after she threatens to let the giant beast fall on him. And just then, Steve, King, Dom, and the gangsters all arrive and help take out the elephant handlers. Afterward, King allows Elva and Dom to both keep their jobs and get married, now that he knows Dom was innocent. And Steve asks Wonder Woman not to leave, which she says is forbidden by Amazon law, but she'll always be nearby, even when he least suspects it. Let's try to focus on the good stuff before getting too much into the more disappointing aspects of this story. The circus setting is really fun. Seeing Wonder Woman put on a show, it was really great. There's a pretty funny bit where King and Dom are chasing after the elephant with Elva, and they jump on horses, but they weren't paying attention and grabbed horses who'd been trained to work with clowns. So, of course, when they tell the horses to go faster, they lie down on the ground, and when they tell them to lie down, they get up and gallop. So, that was cute. The part with Wonder Woman and Etta in the baby elephant costume is a bit of ridiculous fun. And it's good to see that even when she's not acting as Wonder Woman, Diana is helping out by taking kids to the circus. But yeah, we've got to talk about the issue at hand. The depiction of the elephant handlers from Burma, which of course nowadays is Myanmar, is just a very unfortunate, dated, offensive depiction. I would say easily the worst that we've had so far in this series. It just spoils the entire story and makes it really difficult to focus on anything else. And even the fact that San Yan turns out to be an Axis spy at the end really just doesn't help anything. Although the story doesn't make it clear if it's just him who's the spy or it's actually all of the handlers. I mean, they do speak some phrases in a Southeast Asian script, but I looked up the Burmese alphabet and this is definitely not it. It doesn't even look Japanese, it looks more like Chinese. And although I don't read Chinese, I think it's fairly safe to guess that the symbols are just completely made up and inspired by, probably looking at the menu at a Chinese restaurant. Anyway, let's leave this one behind and move on to the next story. Colonel Darnell informs Major Trevor that an army transport was sunk by a U-boat just 10 miles from shore. He orders Trevor to question the captured American Gestapo head, Baroness Paula von Gunther, and Steve replies that he'll take Diana Prince with him because of both her detective and stenographic skills. Diana, packing her bag for a weekend away, has just closed the suitcase carrying her costume and lasso when Steve enters, telling her about their mission and saying she'll still have time for her trip afterward. At the prison, they meet the warden, and Diana leaves her bag on his table as they go to question the Baroness. She says she can't know anything since she's kept in solitary, but when Steve pulls out a lie detector, she breaks her bonds, smashing the device over his head and rendering it inoperable. Back in the warden's house, his young, cowboy-loving son, Freddy, practices his lasso on his sister before spotting Diana's suitcase and roping it, pulling it off the table. It falls open, and although he puts everything else back, the little boy is unable to resist the lure of the golden rope. After collecting her bag, Diana and Steve leave, and Von Gunther is taken back to her cell, where it's revealed that she's been bribing her guard, a man named Swipe, to be allowed certain freedoms, like a trapdoor in her cell that leads down to a comfortable, well-lit room where she can confer with her agents while being waited on hand and foot. Her spies bring her the captured Captain Loyal, but even when she tries to hypnotize him to get information, his resolve is too strong. Above ground, the Baroness is allowed a trip to the yard for some exercise, where she sees Freddy rope his sister. She's able to recognize the influence of the magic lasso, and so has Swipe take it from the child. The next day there's another U-boat attack, but this time American planes are able to sink the German ships, and the body of Captain Loyal, the only man who could have informed on the Allies, is found among the wreckage. Diana refuses to believe that he was a traitor, so she changes into her Wonder Woman costume only to find that her lasso is missing. Knowing that asking too many questions in either identity will cause too much suspicion, Wonder Woman pole vaults into the prison and sees Freddy playing cowboy. Thinking he may be able to tell her about her lasso, she plays with him for a bit, giving him tips on throwing. She tells him she'll send him a real rope, and he replies he had one made from chain, but it was taken by Swipe. The superhero hides, waiting for the man to appear. But then an alarm sounds, and when she reveals herself, she is surrounded by armed men, asking why she killed Von Gunther's guard. She denies it, but when they try to arrest her, she shoves them aside and vaults back over the wall. She calls Steve to explain, and he tells her he'll investigate and clear her name. The autopsy reveals that Swipe was poisoned, and a witness says he fell after drinking from a bottle given to him by the Baroness. Steve is waiting for Wonder Woman to call so he can give her the good news, but he needs Diana there to take dictation. He won't let the secretary go, so she sneaks into another room and calls from an extension. And when the Major walks in and notices she's on the line, she quickly comes up with the story that she's listening in order to type up Wonder Woman's statement. But later, when the superhero finally gets to the prison, she's arrested, because the only witness disappeared after going to get the truth from Von Gunther. The Amazon asks to be put in a cell next to the Baroness, and when she's told that solitary is only for insubordinates, she quickly becomes insubordinate, grabbing a gun and shooting at the floor by the guard's feet, and lifting the warden by his ankles. Once in solitary, she's able to hear noises coming from the Baroness's secret room below, and Von Gunther herself opens the cell door and catches the Amazon with her own lasso. She's taken to the hidden room, and tied to a post with the lasso, but it turns out Freddy has been captured as well, so once she's alone, she pulls up the post and bashes open Freddy's cage with her shoulder. Just then, the Baroness reappears, shoving her gun against the Amazon's back, but the boy snags her with his rope and Wonder Woman breaks free. Von Gunther slips away from Freddy's grip and escapes down a tunnel, Wonder Woman close on her trail. Back at the office, Steve learns of a U-boat base near the prison and orders the cavalry to attack, but their commanding officer is killed in the useless charge. That's when Wonder Woman arrives, having followed the Baroness but arriving too late to stop her from getting to the safety of the base. The Amazon quickly grabs a horse and leads the charge. Her steed jumps down to the deck of a U-boat, and her lasso forces the captain to surrender, while Von Gunther is caught in the crossfire, the seemingly fatal shot knocking her down into the dark water. After the battle, the cavalry makes Wonder Woman an honorary colonel of the regiment, and she presents Freddy with a new rope, thanking him with a peck on the cheek that makes Steve slightly jealous. So, in case it didn't ring a bell, this is the story that the first episode of Season 1 of the Linda Carter Show was based on. It's the same basic setup with Von Gunther in prison, and secret passages, and the little boy who takes the lasso. Some of the details are different, sure, but it's still pretty much the same story. One thing that's pretty fun, when Freddy is going to rope his sister, she's sitting in a chair reading an issue of Sensation Comics, which I thought was pretty cute. Steve pulling out the lie detector is a direct reference to William Moulton Marston, who spent a large part of his career trying to perfect such a device. The one part that weirded me out, though, was the use of the cavalry. I mean, in World War II, with tanks and bombers and things, and you're literally calling the cavalry, a bunch of guys on horses, to take out a base hidden on American soil. It was just kind of weird. The best I can figure is that it's to keep up with Freddy's cowboy theme. And yeah, here at the end, Von Gunther is shot and falls into the water. And, you know, it's implied that she dies, but obviously she's gonna be back. I mean, she's already been back from the dead at least once so far, so I am sure we're going to see her again. So, moving on to the last story in Wonder Woman issue 1, we have The Greatest Feat of Daring in Human History. Wonder Woman picks up a transmission on her mental radio from Etta Candy, who says that her brother was attacked by spies. Army dispatch rider Mint Candy was riding his motorcycle on a mission in Texas and nodding off at the wheel, or, I guess, handlebars, and so missed the fact that a rope had been run across the road to stop him. The bike flipped forward and he cracked his head against a rock, waking up 2 days later with a fractured skull. Thankfully, he had memorized the message he was delivering, so no military secrets were stolen. Etta, worried about her brother and hoping Wonder Woman will be able to hear her on the mental radio, asks the superhero to find the perpetrators. The next day at Diana's office, Etta shows up wearing a 10-gallon hat, declaring she's going home to Texas for Independence Day to visit her brother, and Diana is going with her. The secretary agrees, and they take a train to the Lone Star State. Diana meets Mint, and they go to the Candy family farm, the Bar L Ranch. Mint asks one of the cowboys, Pancho, to get some horses ready for them to ride to an old mine. But first the Mexican makes a secret phone call, telling someone to quickly get to the mine. Despite her claims that she doesn't have much experience riding, Diana proves to be a master equestrian when she snatches Etta's dropped handkerchief out of the air at top speed. Once at the mine, the Amazon's keen senses hear a call for help coming from the darkness, and they look down to find a woman passed out at the bottom of the pit. Mint manages to climb down and get a rope under her, and Diana has to fake a strain as she and Etta pull the girl up. Upon waking, the woman introduces herself as Pepita Valdez, a dancer from Mexico City. She says she was kidnapped by a Senor Gomez, who left her in the mine and would visit her every day, offering to let her out if she married him. Back at the ranch, Pepita and Mint hit it off instantly, but she gives him a cigarette that makes him very lightheaded. Pancho appears, and Pepita tells him she did what he asked, but doesn't like it, as Mint is a good guy. The cigarette also turns out to have some kind of truth serum, or fumes, I guess, as Mint promptly answers the cowboy's question about the orders he was carrying on the day of his accident. Pancho rides off to tell his commander, but he's thrown from his horse when its hoof lands in a gopher hole, and we see him promising to complete his mission or die, as the narration box wonders if the fall will kill him. Diana and Etta return from a walk to find Pepita bent over Mint's body, and Etta tackles the girl thinking she's killed her brother. They wrestle for a bit before Pepita pulls a gun, which Diana knocks out of the way just in time. The dancer grabs a horse and takes off, saying she doesn't have much time but will be back. Diana has changed into her costume and used hypnosis to learn Mint's spilled secrets by the time Etta returns, so the college girl climbs onto her back so Wonder Woman can use her super speed to catch Pepita. The Mexican leads them into an ambush, and the two women surrender so they can be taken to the spies' leaders. As this is going on, Darnell and Trevor learn from the Mexican Captain Diaz that there's a hidden base along that country's coast that's filled with the Japanese invasion force. They don't know the exact location, however, so Darnell sends Steve to investigate. Wonder Woman and Etta are headed to the Mexican capital as well, thanks to some friendly Japanese spies giving them a ride. But the men decide Etta isn't worth it, and throw her out of the moving vehicle directly into the path of the second car. Wonder Woman quickly overpowers her captors and grabs the wheel, swerving the vehicle into a tree and jumping clear just in time. The two women make their way to Mexico City, where they see a poster for a bullfight starring their old friend Pepita. It seems she's not a dancer after all, but instead a famous matador. They go to the arena and watch her take out several bulls. Then it's announced she's going up against El Terrifico, the most savage bull in the country. But before the fight can begin, the beast breaks through the wooden gate when Pepita's back is turned, and as she tries to get away, her foot gets caught in her dropped red cape and she twists her ankle. She just barely manages to hold her ground, sword raised futilely against the charging animal. But then Wonder Woman dives in front of the bull, grabbing it by the horns and holding it back. She gets the golden lasso around El Terrifico's neck and shows off for the crowd, commanding the bull to stand on its head and balancing on its back as it circles around the arena to the delight of all. She then picks up the hurt Pepita, and she and Etta take the girl to her dressing room. The matador is astonished that the Amazon would save her after she'd tried to kill them, and Wonder Woman replies that Pepita is brave and should use her courage for a good cause. Explaining that the Japanese have captured her elderly father and threatened to torture him to death if she didn't follow their wishes, the girl decides to do what's right and tells them the location of the hidden base. Steve and Captain Diaz have just arrived at the airport when they meet Wonder Woman, who gives them a map to the base and tells them to send a squad of fighters after her. She and Etta fly to the secret base and surrender, and so are taken directly to the base's commander instead of having to fight their way through enemy troops. The general threatens to kill Etta, so Wonder Woman holds off the soldiers with one hand while lassoing their commander with the other, forcing him to surrender when Steve arrives. The next day, Mint is at Pepita's bedside. She says she loves him, but is too dangerous, and he points out that her father is safe, the invasion force has been stopped, and Pancho turns out to be dead, so there's nothing stopping them from being together after the war. So again, we have an unfortunately cliched depiction of people from south of the border, but thankfully, in this case, it's not nearly as bad as the Burmese elephant handlers were in the earlier story. We do, unfortunately, get a horrible, dated depiction of a black porter on the train, which is just unfortunate. One thing we did get to learn, though, is that Etta is originally from Texas. So, well, I'm not going to try the accent because I know I'll just mess it up, but just picture in your head a large Texas girl going, woo-woo! Mint is a fairly likable character. Etta hints at the beginning that maybe he and Diana can hit it off, but as soon as she arrives, she can tell it's just not going to happen. The best part of this issue is kind of a running joke that they have. When they're on the train, it's revealed that Etta has an entire suitcase full of candy, and Diana tries to convince her that, it's not healthy, and in wartime it's unpatriotic to hoard stuff for yourself when you could send it to help the troops overseas, and that if she's too big, that Etta won't be able to catch a man. And Etta's responses are just great. She's like, what do you need a man for when you have candy? And when Wonder Woman says that eating that much sugar will ruin her constitution, she says, oh, that's okay, my constitution has plenty of room for amendments. Which I loved. She does say that she will take off 10 pounds, and if she likes it, then she'll lose even more weight, but if she doesn't like it, then oh well. And at the end, that gets picked up again, and she says she took off the 10 pounds, and she really just doesn't like it, so she's gonna stick with candy. One part that I had a problem with, though, when she steered the car into the tree, she jumped out, but none of the guys who were in the car with her survived, and she just kind of casually brushes it off with a joke. Which, I get that they're spies in wartime, but it just still felt rather cavalier. I liked seeing how Wonder Woman was willing to still save Pepita's life, even though she'd betrayed them to their enemies, and how that really affected the Matador's life, and convinced her to switch sides and help out the Allies, so that was really great. And yet again, we have Wonder Woman using brains over brawn. Instead of fighting her way through this base, she, surrenders and is taken to the leader, and oops, there goes the magic lasso, and now they're surrendering. So this issue, with its 4 stories, had a lot of ups and downs. The ups I really, really did like, but the downs really were quite bad. If it had been one bad stereotype, I could maybe look past it, but 3 in one issue is just beyond excessive, so I'm gonna knock it down to 3 stars. Next up is the post-crisis issue, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 11, Fire and Torment. Cover date is December 1987. The executive editor was Dick Giordano. The cover artist was George Perez. The writers were Len Wein and George Perez. Penciler was George Perez. Inker was Bruce D. Patterson. Colorist was Carl Gafford, letterer was John Costanza, and the editor was Karen Berger. And I'm reading this from the Wonder Woman by George Perez Omnibus. The issue picks up where we left off, with Zeus and the Olympians watching as Wonder Woman confronts the flame-spitting Hydra. Knowing from her time with Julia Capitellus that chopping off its 7 heads won't kill the monster, she instead tries to distract it so she can continue down the path. She smashes the pillars holding up the cavern roof, destroying her axe in the process, and the rubble of the collapsing ceiling pins the creature into place. She ties together all 7 of its heads with her lasso, then with a quick prayer to Artemis fires 3 arrows that bury themselves in the creature's heart. The dying beast sinks into the lava, and she manages to pull her lasso free just in time. But then she's struck by a stray fireball and crashes into the cavern floor. The watching Morpheus, god of dreams, although not the one from the famous Sandman comics, because he won't debut for another 2 years, gives her a moment's rest to recuperate, although he says that too much sleep will be fatal, and it's up to her to rouse herself before it's too late. We next see Steve and Etta exiting a plane in Oklahoma. Steve's cousin, Doug Annenson, greets them at the terminal with the sad news that the colonel's father passed away about an hour before. Steve is obviously devastated, especially since he's still mourning the loss of Matt McCallus. He says he's glad Etta accompanied him, as he now feels very alone. In the palace on Paradise Island, Hippolyta is pacing, wondering why the goddesses would give her a daughter only to constantly keep them apart. She knows she shouldn't disobey the gods, but she remembers that it was said Heracles had been driven mad by Hera when he attacked the Amazons, and wonders if a similar madness might now have taken hold of his father. Suddenly a vulture, which aren't native to Paradise Island, appears outside her window, its piercing gaze meeting her eyes. Now sure what to do, Hippolyta takes off her crown, deciding to be a mother rather than a queen. A guard calls to Menelope, and they watch as their leader, clad in full armor, gallops her horse toward the Cavern of Doom. The oracle says they must send Philippus to stop her, as the queen's desire to help her daughter may mean the downfall of the Amazons. Inside the cave, Diana forces herself to get up and continue her quest. Her armor and offensive weapons were destroyed in the fight, leaving her in her traditional costume and armed only with her lasso. The path diverges into 2 round passageways, but as she's trying to decide which to take, a nearby pillar, that looks like it's made up of 1,000 screaming faces, lets forth a constant wailing noise that fills her heart with terror. Suddenly, in the right-hand passage, she sees an image of all the Amazons who died over the centuries protecting the sealed gateway, their souls trapped, crying out for her to rescue them. She's not sure they're real, but then the image changes and she hears the voice of Julia. The woman appears, beaten and tormented, trapped in the center of a giant spider's web. She says she's dying and asks Diana to set her free, but when the Amazon leaps to help her surrogate mother, the professor's form changes, shifting into a half-snake, half-woman creature called Echidna, its long tail wrapping itself around the princess's neck. Hippolyta pulls up in front of the unguarded cavern, but as she walks toward the entrance, battle axe in hand, a thrown bola wraps itself around her legs, and she falls to the ground. The vulture watches from a nearby branch as Philippus tries to convince the queen to return. On her feet again, Hippolyta tells her captain that she can't explain at the moment, but the gods have made a mistake. Philippus says she can't let the queen go, at which point the vulture dives at the captain, pecking at her eyes. As it flies away, Hippolyta charges at her friend, saying she doesn't want to hurt her, but has no choice. The bird bears witness to their battle, as the queen overcomes the captain and, refusing to allow her to feel any guilt for not getting back up, knocks her unconscious. She puts the woman across the back of her horse, and, saying she hopes her sisters will be able to forgive her, sends it back to the city. She then picks up her helmet and heads into the cave, the vulture following her. It's then revealed that Pan has been watching this scene from Mount Olympus. He thinks to himself that he hadn't planned on this, and the queen must be stopped before she can learn his secret. Back in the cave, Wonder Woman wrestles with Echidna. She manages to free herself from its coils and flings it away, then dives toward a pool of light that seems to beckon to her. She flies through a flock of little bat monsters and fights off one last attack from the she-snake before breaking the watery surface, and suddenly finds herself flying through a stormy night sky. She sees an American plane and wonders if she's been sent back to the night Steve arrived on Paradise Island, although something is different. But before she can figure it out, Boreas, god of the north wind, calls to her, saying he's blowing away the mystery that clouds her mission. The Amazon finds herself unable to control her flight as she dives straight into the ocean, down to the depths where the wrecked plane lies. Poseidon now calls to her as well, saying he will wash away her questions. And suddenly, when she reaches the seafloor, the water seems to disappear, and she can walk as if she were on land. She's now close enough to the wreckage to tell that the plane is much older than the one Steve flew. But just then a voice greets her in English, and she looks up to see a cloaked figure standing on a rock. As the light behind it dims, she recognizes its armor and colors, and the last panel is a full-page spread of a woman with orange hair and a Greek armor version of the Wonder Woman costume. Her face is covered by a helmet, but she tells the princess that she's the warrior Hippolyta named her daughter after, and the girl can call her Diana. I like in this issue that instead of going the traditional route of cutting off its heads, Diana was able to use the knowledge she'd gained from spending time in Man's World and defeating the creature in a more creative way. That was really cool. In Greek mythology, the echidna was called the Mother of Monsters, and it gave birth to creatures like Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards Hades, and the Hydra. If you're familiar with the word outside of mythology, there's an Australian anteater species that's named after it. Apparently they did that because the scientists thought that it had both mammal and reptile features, since it's obviously, a furry mammal, but it also lays eggs. I'm not quite sure what's up with this vulture yet. Traditionally they're a symbol of Hades, kind of like the stereotypical image of a vulture perched on a hangman's gallows. But it's also a symbol of Heracles, which could have some interesting implications. I'm also not sure what Pan's on about with his whole having some kind of secret. He's usually a nature god revered by shepherds. He's depicted as a satyr, which is a man with goat legs and tail and goat horns growing out of his forehead. The fight between Hippolyta and Philippus is, it's just kind of sad. They're good friends. Neither one wants to hurt the other, but Hippolyta knows she has to help her daughter, and Philippus knows that she has to stop her, and they don't really have any other choice. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Captain America Civil War, where most of the people on both sides of the issue are friends, and even when they're fighting, they're really trying not to hurt each other. One of the things I really liked about the artwork in this issue, when Boreas and Poseidon are talking to Wonder Woman, they don't actually physically manifest, but, well, in Boreas' case, it's the clouds, and Poseidon, it's sea foam. It kind of arranges itself into a face, and the text bubbles are coming from there, so I really like that effect. That's neat. I will admit, I do know the secret behind this other Diana. It was basically impossible, just researching Wonder Woman comics for the past few months, to not come across this information, although I'm going to leave off the reveal until next episode, because that kind of spoiler is never fun. I remember back when I was playing the first BioShock game, I was going through one of the levels and looked on the wiki for something and happened to see it that said, such and such character tells you this and such thing. If you've played BioShock, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then I'm like, wait, why is that a link? And I clicked on it, and it spoiled the entire game and kind of took all the fun out of the big reveal. So I really liked this issue. Let's give it 4 stars. Moving on to the New 52 era, we have Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 11, Sunrise, and that's S-O-N. Cover date is September 2012. Executive editor was Bobby Chase. Cover artist was Cliff Chiang. Writer was Brian Azzarello. Pencils and inks were Cliff Chiang. Colorist was Matthew Wilson. Letterer was Jared K. Fletcher. The editors were Matt Idelson and Chris Conroy. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 2, Guts. Strife arrives on Mount Olympus, telling her mother Hera that she missed an amazing time. After what Wonder Woman did to Hades, Strife is beginning to like her, but Hera says not to get too attached. The Queen of the Gods has put a price on the life of Zola's baby, and Diana is unlikely to survive if she insists on protecting it. Hera has offered something much more valuable than one of her husband's illegitimate children, but she doesn't care. In fact, she's made the bargain with one of those children. We next go to a peach orchard in Coloma, Michigan, where Demeter, goddess of the harvest, is met by Artemis, moon goddess of the hunt. They talk about how Zeus's empty throne needs to be filled, and the prophecy about one child of Zeus defeating the others, which Demeter says is inevitable. In Olive Burn, Virginia, Zola is visiting a doctor but refusing to let Hermes get any further than the waiting room. He and Diana join Lennox on a bench outside, and Diana tells the messenger god that their friend is trying to have some small amount of control in their current crazy situation, and they need to support her. Lennox jokes that the ultrasound could show that the baby is distinctly unhuman, getting glares from his companions. But just then, the sky goes dark and it looks like an eclipse as Apollo and Artemis ride up on a motorcycle. They say they're there for the child, whom they call a means to an end, and that it's not wise to oppose them. The twins tell Diana that she's had her fun mocking the queen, but now it's time to stand down. The Amazon replies she's in fact going to stand up, and removes her coat to reveal her costume underneath. Apollo blasts Lennox with a beam of red-hot sunlight, but the unbreakable man isn't even scratched. Wonder Woman jumps into the fight, and she battles the sun god while Hermes takes on the moon goddess. Lennox tries to punch Artemis, but it's his stony fist that cracks when it connects with her jaw, and then his chest when she hits him back. Apollo has beaten Wonder Woman pretty badly and offers to stop, calling her audacity in opposing him a youthful indiscretion on account of her relatively young age, but he again kicks her into the mud. Just then Zola, who's been among the crowd watching the battle from the sidelines, gets into a pickup truck and crashes it into the sun god, but he's completely unharmed as the vehicle wraps itself around him. Zola gets out and tries shooting him point blank with a shotgun, but it's also ineffective, so he gathers her up under one arm and calls for his sister, who's been beating Hermes bloody with his own caduceus. The twins ride their motorcycle up into the sky, daylight returning. Wonder Woman and Hermes try to pull themselves together, but Lennox is far too badly damaged after the punch from Artemis to be any use in a fight. On Olympus, Zola is on her knees before Hera, and Apollo says he's done what was asked, and now it's time for the queen to give him his reward. Zeus's throne. Strife is shocked that her mother would trade something so important for one mortal woman and her child, but Hera is perfectly content with the deal. She tells Apollo to take it, but then there's a flash of light, and the still mud-spattered Wonder Woman, along with Hermes, appears in front of the throne, vowing she'll stop him. This issue introduces us to two new gods that we haven't seen before, Demeter and Artemis. Artemis appears as a pale blue woman, and when she's talking to Demeter, she is glowing and has big deer antlers coming out of her forehead. But then later when she's with her brother, the antlers and glow are both gone. Demeter, the best way I can think to describe her is if Poison Ivy and Swamp Thing had a kid together. If you're not familiar with comics, Swamp Thing is a big green plant monster made out of moss and vines. And Poison Ivy is a Batman villain who mostly dresses in a leaf-type costume and occasionally has green skin. The town where Zola is meeting up with this doctor is called Olive Burn. That's, of course, a reference to William Moulton Marsden's second wife, Olive Byrne. And when Lennox jokes about the ultrasound revealing that her kid could look unhuman, I mean, he talks about, maybe it's got a tail or wings. I mean, that is 100% a possibility that they need to think about. I mean, even in the original myths, the demigods didn't necessarily look 100% human. And in this version, most of the gods look very obviously different than your regular Homo sapien. Although I've got to wonder, how common would it be in this universe with, aliens and metahumans and demigods for, the doctor to do an ultrasound and say, oh, hey, look, the kid's gonna have, I don't know, pointed ears or 6 arms. You wouldn't think it'd be completely unheard of. One thing I noticed in this issue, when Diana is wearing civilian clothes, she's got her tiara pushed back as a headband, which I thought was pretty neat. And I thought it was interesting. During the fight, she mentions that she is 23 years old. So, good issue. Let's give it 3 stars. Next is the TV show. We have Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 10, Judgment from Outer Space, Part 2. The air date was January 17, 1977. Starring Linda Carter and Lyle Waggoner. Tim O'Connor played Andros. Scott Hylands played Paul Bjornsson. Kurt Kasnar played Colonel General Heinrich von Dreiberg. And Hank Brandt played Professor Graebner. We again see Wonder Woman entering Andros' spaceship while the Council watches. This is followed by a quick scene where Steve reports to Blankenship that an unrecognized submarine was spotted, and he correctly surmises that that's how the Nazis are getting the alien out of the country. Then, after getting past some invisible force fields with the same control whistle that opened the door, Wonder Woman activates the ship's communicator and sends the watching aliens a message about how they're trying to rescue Andros from the Nazis. The Council isn't convinced, however, and decide among themselves that if the humans are able to rescue Andros and he can return to his ship, the planet will be spared. 2 weeks later, the sub carrying Andros still hasn't been found, so Steve volunteers to infiltrate Schloss Markheim, the Nazi interrogation center that British intelligence believes is where the alien would have been taken. We see that this is in fact the case, with Bjornsson showing Andros to his not uncomfortable rooms. Steve reaches London and is introduced to Evan Mallory, a Welsh spy who will take the Major to the Schloss. Back in Washington, Etta invites Diana for a weekend at the beach, but the secretary says she has plans, and we then see Wonder Woman flying the invisible plane to Germany. In the Schloss's lab, scientists are struggling to figure out Andros' medallion, still under the impression that the visitor is a human scientist working with the Allies. As Steve and the Welshman parachute behind enemy lines, Andros attends a dinner and is introduced to Colonel General Heinrich von Dreiberg, the base's commander, and Professor Graebner, a scientist trying to analyze the medallion. They still think Andros is an atomic researcher, despite him telling them that his civilization mastered atomic power ages ago, to the point where it's now taught to school children. Privately, Dreiberg and Graebner scoff at the visitor, but Bjornsson is still sure Andros can be persuaded to join their cause. Also at the dinner is the beautiful Lisa Engel, who visits Andros in his room that evening in an attempt to seduce secrets out of him. He doesn't fall for it, instead reminding the woman of the young dreamer she used to be, someone who believed in true love, and how she's letting herself be used to pervert that ideal, which should be a gift, into a tool to be used for ulterior motives. His uncanny knowledge of the details of her childhood creep the Fräulein out, so she runs off. Andros is then contacted by Gorel, a member of the Council. Gorel says that the Council needs Andros' idealism and wants to call off the trial, bringing his friend back. When he says that Earth will of course be destroyed, however, Andros refuses, saying he still has faith in the humans. Gorel, disappointed, tells him that if that faith proves wrong, Andros will lose his life and the planet will still be obliterated. The next morning at breakfast, Andros is admiring the Schloss's artwork when Wonder Woman comes bursting through the door. She shoves guards aside and grabs the alien by the hand, but he refuses to go with her. He reminds her that part of his mission is to speak with the leaders of both sides of the war. There's another struggle, and Bjornsson manages to remove Wonder Woman's belt, stripping her of her power so she's easily caught. Andros tells the Swede that despite being captured, he will remain with the Nazis so long as they don't hurt Wonder Woman. We next see Bjornsson, Dreiberg, and Graebner discussing their new visitor. The Germans don't believe the reports of her strength and abilities, but Bjornsson points out the doors she broke off their hinges when she burst into the room. He thinks there's a scientific explanation to the Amazon's powers, some experiment created by Andros. He has the two placed in the same room, keeping watch through a two-way mirror. Wonder Woman is frustrated that Andros is allowing himself to stay with those who imprisoned him, and he points out that the Americans did the exact same thing. She tries to argue that the Allies don't use concentration camps, but he reminds her of the internment of Japanese Americans. He argues that he's here to study humanity as a whole, not just individual nations, and he has to put aside his personal feelings in order to keep his judgment impartial. She counters that she's now a helpless prisoner without her belt and lasso, but he replies that if she had them, she'd be the one committing acts of war by destroying the Schloss. The Nazis secretly watch the exchange, sure Andros will soon be on their side. We next see Steve and Mallory arrive, undercover as Nazi officers with a message for Dreiberg. But Steve's cover is at risk. It turns out there's someone at the castle who actually knows the man whose identity the Major is using. They manage to avoid him only thanks to Mallory's quick thinking. Meanwhile, Andros and Wonder Woman have been brought to the lab to explain his medallion and her belt and lasso. The Nazis think them nuclear, but the alien tries to explain that he and his race have outgrown the atomic power the Germans are so desperate to master. He tells of other worlds that developed such weapons and destroyed themselves, and claims that humanity will follow if they don't give up their primitive ways. While this is going on, the soldier who's friends with the victim of Steve's identity theft chats with the guard who greeted the infiltrators. He mentions that he and his friend are the same height, and the guard, realizing he's been deceived, rushes to call Bjornsson. Steve and Mallory are swiftly caught by the Swede, and then Andros and Wonder Woman are brought in. Having finally grown impatient of Andros' story of coming from another world, Bjornsson threatens to kill the Allies if the alien doesn't tell them how to make atomic weapons. The two infiltrators are thrown into a cell, and Bjornsson says he will force Andros to watch Wonder Woman being tortured if the alien doesn't explain how his medallion works. This finally shows Andros that while the Nazis only care about violence and power, Wonder Woman and her allies, despite their flaws, are willing to put themselves at risk to help a man who could easily destroy their world. Bjornsson orders his men to attack, but the constantly watching alien council suddenly appears floating above the scene. While everyone else is still too shocked to move, Wonder Woman grabs their equipment, reattaching her belt and giving Andros back his medallion. The council disappears and the Nazis snap out of it, but the Amazon and the alien give them the slip. They hide in a supply closet, and Andros confides that even with his medallion, his power has been taken away. He needs the humans' help in order to return to his spaceship, but if he's killed, the Earth will be destroyed. Looking for the two, the Nazis enter Steve and Mallory's cell, allowing the men to escape momentarily. They're quickly cornered, but luckily Wonder Woman catches sight of them and springs into action. The four take off, Wonder Woman managing to waylay their pursuers by bending some metal doors to block the corridor. They run into Lisa Engel, who says she won't let Andros be harmed, and leads them to a secret exit. As his friends work on opening the door, Andros thanks the woman. She says she doesn't know why she helped them, but he says he does, and when she finds her true love, he will too. She runs off just before the Nazis appear and start to close in on them. Andros calls out to the council, asking for his powers to be returned so he can help Wonder Woman, who is humanity's best hope. His medallion starts to glow again, and the Nazis are frozen in place, giving them time to escape. A few days later, Andros and Wonder Woman are standing outside his spaceship, and she asks about Earth's judgment. He says humanity is flawed, but balanced enough to sway the Council's vote in their favor. He says they're being given 50 years to improve, by which time they'll have atomic power and begun space travel. He also invites Wonder Woman to come with him to explore the glory of the civilized cosmos, including spending time with him on his homeworld. She says she can't, that she has to stay with her world, and he replies he'll ask again when he returns in 1992, then enters his spaceship and departs. The following day, Diana Prince is distracted at work, and Etta correctly guesses that she's deep in thought about a man. The secretary says he had to go far away, but promised to return. Steve and Blankenship exit the Major's office, and Etta informs the General that the President wants his final report on Andros. Steve tells Diana that he hopes the alien really is gone like he said, since he saw the way Wonder Woman looked at him, and she replies that she's sure the superhero chose to stay on Earth with him. So this episode completely contradicts the last one, where they said that there was a satellite that Andros had to give this code to every few days, otherwise it would blow up the planet. That's just straight up not even mentioned here. And it bugs me that the qualifications for the judgment keep changing. First it's Andros has to make a judgment, then it's if the humans kill Andros, they'll destroy the planet, then it's he has to be able to return to his spaceship. I mean, you'd think in a case where 2 billion souls are at stake, the rules would be planned out well ahead of time instead of just making it up as they go along. One thing to note, this is the first episode without the famous Wonder Woman spin. She goes from being Diana Prince to she's in her plane to she's back in the US and in her secretary costume again. No transitions at all. The part where Andros is talking to Lisa and giving very detailed description of her childhood, I don't know what that was about. I mean, last episode, he would refer to the past because he'd been there, talking with Abe Lincoln and stuff. But this is just, random girl from Germany. He wouldn't have... I wouldn't think that he had been around at her childhood, but does he have some kind of technology that reads her mind or tells him her deepest secrets? I don't know. I gotta say, while Andros kind of has some points when he's talking about how the Americans, the Germans haven't treated him that differently, and okay, sure, I get it, he has to remain impartial, but it's a little much when you remember that the Holocaust was in full swing at that point. I mean, sure, the Americans were afraid of him and were making plans in case they needed to try to take him out, but the Nazis were perpetrating the most horrific, systematic genocide mankind had ever seen, and we can only pray we'll ever see. So, there's not that much difference between the two sides. Yeah, there is. Kurt Kastner, the guy who played Dryberg, was famous for doing Broadway. He played Uncle Max in the original production of The Sound of Music. And in the 60s, he played Alexander Fitzhugh on the Irwin Allen show Land of the Giants. When Wonder Woman is talking to Andros at the end, and he talks about all the different planets that they can visit, he mentions one where she would be able to fly. I like to think that that's a reference to the fact that in the comics, she's been able to fly since the late 50s. Obviously, she doesn't have that power in the show, and it's probably for the best. I mean, yes, they had the technology to sort of, kind of, make it look like George Reeves could fly in the 1950s Superman show, but given the effects quality for her invisible jet, and that they had to keep making the spin transition cheaper and cheaper, I don't really mind the fact that she can't fly in the show. Andros says that the world will be judged again in 1992, which, at the point when the show was coming out, was still a few decades in the future. And I like to think that the aliens would have looked down and seen that, the Cold War had just ended and the Gulf War was over, and decided that, yeah, they're okay, let's give them another 50 years. So, good episode. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Okay, next, not really a normal review, but I am going to give my thoughts on the Lego Batman movie. Greetings, sisters. This is Angela recording live from my car after the movie. Sorry that the audio quality is even worse than normal, but I want to give my thoughts while they're still fresh, but there's an 8-hour shift at work between now and getting back to my microphone at home, so I figured I'd just whip out my phone and record right now. It was a really great movie. I mean, really fun. It was a good movie all around. Parents and kids, I'm sure, will love it. And there are so many little references and callbacks to the 70-some years of Batman's history. I know my fellow comic book nerds will be cracking up. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but unfortunately, as I suspected, Wonder Woman was just a background character in the scene when the Justice League showed up. I kept an eye out during the credits, and the only members of the Justice League who actually had voices were Superman, Flash, and Green Lantern. So, little disappointing on that front, but just as a movie, really awesome. Definitely go check it out. Okay, I gotta get to work. Bye! Okay, back to my microphone and the less horrible audio quality. Only barely. I just want to add, since Rosario Dawson played Barbara Gordon in this movie, and she has played Wonder Woman in several of the DC animated direct-to-video movies. She did a great job. Her version of the Barbara Gordon Batgirl was really fun. She was a bit older than normal. Batgirl is usually in her late teens, maybe early 20s. But this one was a little bit younger than Batman, not too much. So to me, the fact that Batman sort of kind of quasi had a romantic interest in her wasn't nearly as bad as last year's The Killing Joke, where let's just not go there. But this new Lego Batgirl is definitely a character that little girls can look up to. She's smart, she is competent, she's compassionate and a loyal friend, and there was a really awesome bit that I don't want to give away spoilers, but she kind of took down a major villain from another franchise basically by herself with a minor assist from Catwoman. So it was really great. Again, if you haven't seen the movie yet, go check it out. It is amazing. It's Well, it's easily my favorite Batman movie, and come to think of it, it's the only Batman movie I actually went to the theater to see. Well, okay, BVS. So, I guess it's the second Batman movie I've seen in the theaters, but easily the only one that I saw in the theater that I had a huge smile on my face from start to finish. To finish up, we have the news. Now that the movie is less than 100 days away, we are getting new images of Wonder Woman merchandise and stuff on an at least weekly, if not daily basis. There's really not a way that I can cover it all, either on here or even on the show's Twitter account, but I will do what I can to give the highlights. And the first of that is from the 2017 New York Toy Fair. There was a bunch of Wonder Woman action figures and dolls and statuettes and collectibles. And it's here that we got the first look at, and this is kind of a spoiler, the first look at Ares, who is going to be in the movie. And it has been announced who is going to play Ares, which actually does seem to be a bit of a spoiler for the movie, so I'm not going to actually say who it is, but there will be a link in the show notes if you want to find out. There's also a rumor going around that Arnold Schwarzenegger has some role in the movie. He's famous, or I guess probably more infamous, for playing Mr. Freeze in the 1997 Batman and Robin movie. So this one I'm definitely putting in the rumor category. I find it unlikely that he'd be willing to come back, but who knows? Maybe he's Zeus or somebody. The movie is also getting a novelization and a junior novel, and those are both available for pre-order. DC has announced that June 3, 2017, the day after the movie comes out, is going to be Wonder Woman Day for this year. No news yet if there's going to be anything special, besides the fact that her movie will be brand new in theaters. The first screenings for the movie are in. There are some people who weren't blown away, but the general response seems to be positive, which, is really good. But personally, I can't help but remember that the first screening results for the 2015 Fantastic Four movie were also very positive, and yeah, I went to that movie knowing that it was going to be horrible, and I still left angry. So, these reports are good, but take them with a grain of salt. The news article that I will be linking to for that one does have a link at the bottom to a Q&A on Reddit, where someone claiming to have seen the movie gives a whole bunch of spoilers. I'm not really going to go through that myself, but the link is there if you want to see it. Just please don't let me know what you read. I know that I enjoy a movie a whole lot more when I have minimal amount of spoilage. And lastly, there is going to be a novel coming out in August called Wonder Woman Warbringer. It is a new origin story, and the first 2 chapters are available to read online. So, like always, all these links will be in the show notes, and you can find them on the website, wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. Okay, that is it for episode 11. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. If you're okay with your message being read on the podcast, please let me know. The podcast homepage is wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. There you can find the RSS feed, as well as the show notes, promo, and links to the iTunes and Stitcher feeds. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman Theme, the Best Themysciran Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil. You can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Double Clicks. You can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Next episode, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 10, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 12, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 12, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 11. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve. And when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from going under. And we'll watch you